themselves, please?
Alder Jeanette Morrison, Ward 22.
Alder Franklin Benson, Ward 15.
Alder Evelyn Rodriguez, Ward 4.
Frank Douglas,
Rodriguez, Ward 6.
Carlo, Legislation Committee, Ward 27.
Eli Saban, Legislation Committee, Ward 7.
Kimberly Edwards, Community Development, Ward 19.
Adam Marchand, Legislation Committee, Ward 25.
Thank you all. At this time, we are going to let our presenters. And as you are joining us at the table, we'd like to have your name and address for the records.
university reviewed some other zoning applications for purposes of parking determinations that were earlier phases of this project. The first one, and it was determined, I should add, that OPP amendment was not required. The first one was the new chemical safety building, which is under construction. The second one involved in part the Wright Lab addition, and the most recent one involved installation of the first portion of an underground geothermal heating and cooling system. For tonight's request, we have included all of the information required for an overall parking plan amendment under the city zoning ordinance. Just sort of high-level overview, and there's a lot more detail in the packages that you all have. At the end of the day, after you balance the additions of parking, the reductions of parking, there'll be a net loss from these two zoning applications of 175 parking spaces. The university's planned parking adjustments, including the sizing of the new garage, have taken into account post-COVID changes in people's work habits and the fact that people are now working remotely a portion of the time, at least a portion of the time, many people. So that has been taken into account because the university does not want to underbuild the parking and they want to have smooth parking operations, and by the same token, they don't have any desire to build parking that's not going to be used. So they believe that they've struck a balance and they've worked hard to reach this plan. The net reduction of 175 may be accommodated in current OPP surplus, and university parkers who currently park in the Science Hill area in OPP parking facilities will continue to be able to do so at the end of the project. No one is going to be displaced from the system. And even though it's not directly relevant to the parking situation, I would just mention a side benefit of this is the amount of the block on the Yale property that's being devoted to parking is being reduced as a result of this project, because the new garage will be slightly smaller footprint, and in addition, a sizable parking lot, surface asphalt parking lot, is being removed. So the parking footprint will be reduced. And as an example, where the current garage is, there's going to be a substantial landscape area that can be created. Attachment A, the same portion that you were in looking at that diagram, if you flip to the beginning of attachment A, that goes through in detail what the specific changes are, sort of area by area, lot by lot, rather than take a lot of your time on every number, although I'm happy to talk about it if people have questions. Just sort of on an overall level, the reductions or elimination of spaces are primarily a factor of the elimination of surface lot 16, which has about 200 spaces in it, as well as the elimination of the Pearson Sage garage, which has 442 in service utilized, currently utilized spaces, which will be removed. The 442 that are currently utilized will come off the total. There's some other spaces in the garage that are not utilized. They're not part of the OPP inventory, and they're not part of the OPP surplus. In terms of the added spaces to balance this out, the new garage at 406 spaces is the big one. And there are a couple other things that Yale has done or is doing in anticipation of this. There are a couple of lots off of the immediate site where we received CPC approval and Board of Alder's parking review to add a few parking spaces in each of two lots 15 and 63. We're adding some in one of the lots that remains on this block, lot 29. And there's a property that Yale acquired on Prospect Street that has some additional spaces that can contribute to the OPP. So at the end of the day, 661 spaces are eliminated, 486 spaces, if you look at all these numbers, are added, which is a net reduction of 175 spaces. Also, under the zoning ordinance parking requirements for university use, 76 spaces would be required based on the anticipated new head count that will populate the PSEB building. That's based on different ratios for different, for faculty versus employees, for example, but that would total 76. And that also can easily be absorbed with the surplus of the OPP or accommodated in the surplus. And I would add to you that I think Yale's experience has been that the actual need for parking is somewhat less than the zoning requirement that you have in your regulations, just as an incidental point. So currently, there's unassigned surplus in the Central Science Campus OPP of about 1,300 spaces. And as I said, the adjustments we're making here, the reductions, can be comfortably accommodated, and in fact, will be accommodated in facilities in the Science Hill area. As you know, based on the annual open filings that the university submits, they maintain very active demand management efforts, including shuttle service, bike parking spaces, public transportation, and carpooling incentives. Because the ordinance speaks of doing a on-street parking utilization study in the adjacent or immediate area, we have submitted one, which is part of your packet as well. I think that's exhibit F, attachment F. That was done by Tide and Bond. They looked out, in each direction of the block, basically. And their conclusion when they field surveyed those public parking areas is that I think the vast majority of those spaces, at least the large majority, are restricted to residential permit parkers only, and there are a sizable number of spaces that are short duration stations, 1 hour, 2 hour, a few that may be 4 hour. But Time Bond's conclusion is those are not attractive for somebody who's trying to park and go to work in the car all day. And as I indicated earlier, the university is confident that the revised parking in this area will accommodate all the parkers and not displace any of them in the area. But we did include that point of information because it's required by the ordinance. So in some post-COVID, lower utilization of parking has been considered, and in fact, in the current OPP as of December 2023, that uses an 80% utilization rate, which essentially means that at any given point in time, on average, about 80% of the overall spaces in the OPP would be used, but they're not all used 100% of the time. As we're proposing, Yale will maintain a comfortable surplus because don't forget that the overall parking plan surplus goes on Science Hill. It serves the entire Central Science Campus, and you need to maintain a certain level of flexibility in the OPP. So for example, if a year from now more people start coming back to the office more than they are now, and less remote working is going on, we've got capacity to absorb that. If new people are hired going forward for old buildings or for new buildings, there's capacity to accommodate that. And the way the system is managed, there are parking lots of various sizes and various locations. So if a particular parking area, whether it's a lot or a garage, gets full to capacity, Yale has the ability to move people around to other areas that have the capacity. So it's important to them to maintain, an adequate level of surplus in the system, and they are very confident with where we end up at the end of this project with what they'll have. And I would also just mention going forward, to the extent that they're doing new buildings and new projects, as part of that OPP review process, which I mentioned, any zoning application for one of those new projects will be submitted to the Board of Alders for a parking review. And if, for example, a new building is being built or parking is being removed, and that's going to be served by the surplus, then you have an opportunity to review it in the context of that future project. So in closing, at the end of the day, the university is confident that university parkers in the Science Hill area who participate in the overall parking plan and park in its facilities will continue to have available convenient OPP parking in the Science Hill area without disruption. And we are available to answer any questions that any of you may have on anything that's in the materials or not in the materials, but please let us know, and Steve Brown is able to to help us answer anything that you might have. But that's really our affirmative presentation.
Before we go to questions, we'd like to recognize Alder Brian Wingate of Ward 29, member of the CD committee. And we also like to recognize President Walker Myers, who has come to join us tonight. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Either one of you going to? I think it might be wise, Madam Co-Chair, we have Director Isola, Director of Transportation, Traffic and TTP. And so we welcome you to the table if there's anything that you would like to share in regards to this evening, or perhaps be able to answer some questions.
And name and address for the record, please.
Sandeep Vaisala, Director of Transportation, City of New Haven, 42 William Street. So I've reviewed the plan, and I think based on the testimony that's been accumulated, based on the testimony that I've heard, I think that seems like, there's adequate capacity in existing lots, and with the changes in the net reduction, I think that should be able to, there should be enough room to supply any future demand. And I think, I concur with, everything that's been presented so far. So I didn't have a written testimony but I just decided to just attend, and, just wanted to put that on record.
Okay, yeah, we appreciate that testimony, and then we'll be making that final determination whether or not this complies with what we want to see in that area. Madam Co-Chair, I believe we'll ask if there's any questions from the committee at this time.
Interested?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. So I was wondering, you mentioned that the folks who currently participate in the OPP parking facilities program will be able to be accommodated despite the reduction. So my ward abuts this area, and I've talked to Director Isola a bunch that we have a lot of issues sometimes with folks parking on residential streets, and we struggle sometimes with enforcement. And so I guess it would be helpful to understand who is participating in the official OPP program, and if you have concerns at all about, or if there are thoughts, if you are all working at all on accommodating additional people. I don't know exactly, it's hard to tell exactly who is parking on residential streets, near this area, but it's definitely a problem that I hear a lot about from constituents, and I imagine that some folks, given all the facilities that are around there, some of those folks might be students or faculty or employees, staff. So it'd be helpful to understand who is participating in the official OPP program, and if you think that it might be wise to be accommodating additional members of the Yale community in that program so that there aren't folks parking on residential streets.
Sure. I think Steve may be able to add, but I'll just start and let him continue. I think a very large number of faculty and staff are participating in that program, hundreds of them in the Science Hill area, I believe. I also understand that I think periodically the university does remind people that they should not be parking in the neighborhood. There are periodic reminders of that as well. And so I think at the end of the day, nothing we're talking about here would contribute to any further parking in the neighborhood. And I think Alder Sapin, you bring up a good point that sometimes it may be hard to figure out who it is exactly who's really parking there. But I think there are many, many people who park in the, I forgot what the total figure is.
Yeah, it's more than 200.
Okay, so Steve, if you want to add to that.
Well, in terms of the count, I mean, that's one thing. Let's say 1,000, just a quick number there. But as far as the signing up, it's essentially an elective. I mean, the Yale parking office puts out their fees. It's elective. It's an optional thing. Many opt not to do that, and many do. There's a ratio there, of course. But it's, as far as the overall demand, aside from your comment about sort of some of them seeping into the neighborhood, it's a fairly solid sort of status quo, meaning that, in our opinion, the needs are primarily being met with both the space available as well as the fee structure. And so there are situations where there's like a tie or a fluid. Sometimes within the system, they flow down to Lower Hill House. Sometimes they flow within science, within the Science Hill area. But essentially, that's a constant sort of demand, and we provide a sort of a constant supply for that market. It doesn't necessarily address the errant ones that are coming into your neighborhood. We did do a study to address the how your own regulations for restricted parking does discourage that. And as Mr. Hammer pointed out, with those kind of restrictive times, it seems to us, and we're not in that situation, but it seems to us it's less attractive if I'm going to sort of violate the that particular sign or restriction. I'd have to always come out and see if my car is towed or whatever. So it's somewhat, your rules are good in that it discourages sort of long-term parking in the neighborhood. So that's from our, we have a lot of data backing all of that up, but that's a sort of a quick answer.
If I recall correctly, I think in that study that's in attachment F, I think the primary areas where there was less time restriction and no resident permit only restriction were streets that were kind of surrounded by Yale on both sides without third-party homes or anything like that, like the stretch of Prospect, maybe from Sachem all the way north. I think there's a big field of city metered parking, but there really aren't any for the most part in the area I'm referring to, there aren't really any non-Yale places. And then I think if you go lower down into the Lower Hill House area and on Hill House, lots of metered spaces, again, kind of sandwiched in between Yale buildings, not in a neighborhood. And as you get into the neighborhood, then you're getting into the restricted ones that are.
And I'll just add, so we're sympathetic, and we can't know the extent to which it goes on. Certainly, it's not zero. And just to be really clear and firm, we're making sure that our employees know that they shouldn't be doing that. We're on the record writing to our employees somewhat regularly as a reminder. The parking plan is available. Please do not use permit spaces. So short of enforcement, that is that's a strong message from the university that is reminding people they're not supposed to be doing it. And it's explicitly forbidden also in our contracts with our contractors. So we have it in writing multiple places, and also open to suggestions on other things that we could be doing on this front, because we really don't want to be encroaching on the neighbors' ability to park on their streets.
Thank you. If I could ask one more question. So I'd be interested to know if you have the information, what the fee structure looks like. Because obviously some folks, are maybe more risk tolerant and are happy to park on Bradley Street and think that they're unlikely to get a ticket. And that pencils out to be that they're going to save money rather than paying for parking from Yale. So it'd be helpful to understand what
Happy to. Alder, if you turn to attachment C in the package that's before you, that actually lists the rates that we were referencing.
Thank you.
At some point, if you're actually going to go to the meter in one of the areas where this is a safe solution, basically, not having to worry about your car and it's a sliding scale.
I guess safe solution maybe, but for students in particular, $800 a year is that's a lot of money. I think you're maybe, I don't know if we should be saying this publicly, but unlikely to get $800 worth of tickets. So that's I guess something that is a little bit concerning. But
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the I think a large number of graduate students live off campus in private housing where, oftentimes they have the parking available to them there. So I think Yale's experiences, at least among the student body, there's a much lower percentage of people with cars than among the employees, the faculty and staff.
And just keep in mind, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to suggest that, I think that's a great point. I was going to talk about the first thing. The pricing structure really sometimes dictates, so if the pricing is too low, obviously the lots will be full. The price is too high, they'll obviously park in, the residential neighborhoods. The pricing structure, I mean, for me at least, seems reasonable here because $130, $150 per month, even the highest given their salary, seems like, our parking citations are somewhere between $25 and $35. So, I mean, you will still have someone taking a chance. There's a probability of someone saying, hey, I'll take a chance one or two times, but the moment you get 4 citations in a whole month within maybe 20 working days, then it's not worth it anymore. You might as well get the monthly parking tax, right? So, from an enforcement perspective, we have significant enforcement there, even on weekends, or at least, sorry, not weekends, from morning to evening, because we have a part-time employee who works, and Science Hill is pretty much well covered, at least along Prospect and Sachem, Winchester, and all the neighborhoods. So it's a little bit sort of hard for someone to sort of escape not getting a citation. But as you get further up north and further slightly to the west, it's a little bit challenging for enforcement to unless you get a call. So yes, the pricing structure is important in the sense that the monthly pricing will probably dictate how many people will decide behaviorally to kind of try and take a chance. Students, great point. The students are not going to pay $12, but New Haven, all the students who even own cars pretty much live in and around the campus. So the buffer area within which they have to actually walk or bike is actually pretty short. So they pretty much live, most of the students, even the grad students, postdocs, everyone lives in and around the area. So they probably won't have the need to actually drive unless, off chance they're late, one fine day they actually decide, okay, I'm going to take my car. That's one of those times that, they may get a ticket, they may not get a citation. So I don't know if there's any data on how many students actually park in the slots, but in the garages and lots, but it'll be pretty less. The other point I was going to make is the net reduction, like the net reduction, the amount of reduction, even if the reduction is net capacity. If there's a problem today, that problem still exists. Because the pricing structure, unless the prices really go dramatically up, that's when you'll probably see a escalation of kind of like this spread out into the neighborhoods. Right now, at this point, the pricing structure hasn't changed, it probably seems the same. Maybe it gets adjusted to inflation year over year, but, you can confirm. But it's not going to basically, like from an elasticity perspective, it's not gonna make that much of a difference and spread it to the neighborhood. So I think there's a combination of factors that to consider, like the pricing structure, who's really parking, it's probably mostly faculty and staff. And then the third thing is, enforcement around. But
Alderman
you still see some
Saban, would you like to have, from September, the school year, from September to May, the amount of citations that have been issued in that area that might help to fine tune
That'd be very helpful.
the number of citations that have been given during the school year for comparison?
We could get you
That would
that.
be very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
You have further questions?
I have one additional question. So the one, I understand the points you're making about being able to accommodate the existing demand. One thing I'm wondering about is, it seems like there is one change that maybe could affect demand, which is you're moving to having a parking garage rather than parking lots just in some amount. Is that correct?
Parking garage.
And whereas mostly there's a higher percentage after this change of the parking in the area will be in the garage versus in the
Well,
lot. Is that-
it's a near, just in terms of the size of the garage, we're taking down Pearson Sage,
Right.
which has an effective 442 spaces. We're building a new at 400 spaces. So just in terms of looking garage for garage, it's equivalent, although Pearson Sage is a little larger, but we don't utilize all the spaces.
Okay. I guess the question is mostly if you have a sense of whether you think that people are, I feel like I have a sense that some people are less likely to want parking garages versus in a lot. Maybe some people are more likely to want to park in a garage versus a lot, but if you have a sense of whether that might impact demand for.
Well, in general, probably people would like to park in a lot better than a garage. However, we found when we built the Prospect or the Prospect Sachem garage, which is built probably 15 years ago, we consolidated a lot of that parking there, and that's a very popular garage. It's right in the heart of Science Hill. And so that sort of is a model of when we were building a new garage on lot 16. All things being equal, there was a lot of discouragement of spreading out that 400 over a 400 space lot, someplace in someone's backyard that they didn't really want to be. So in terms of convenience, yes, in general, in the abstract, lots are better. However, for convenience for Science Hill, a garage is better.
Okay. Thank you. I'll yield to the chairs. I appreciate the
Thank you,
opportunity to ask
Alderman.
questions.
Alderman Morrison?
So, not to beat a dead horse, because my question was a lot similar. Just in looking at where you're looking to build, right? My ward is already totally affected because we do have areas that aren't residentially restricted, things of that sort, because of, we have like condos there, right? They get one parking spot, and so they need to be able to park on the street. And so in looking at that and then looking at your fee structure, when I look at this, it says, basically it's saying that a person gotta pay $800 and some a year to go to work, go to school, right? I'm fortunate, I don't have to pay to go to my job. But most aren't gonna do this, and all those outliers that you're saying you really don't know, they're all on Winchester Ave. because it's free. And so my thought is, you guys might have to look at a different way of looking at your fee structure, basing, you can't make, I'm just gonna pick on you, you can't make 250,000 and pay this, and I make 50,000 and have to pay the same thing. And so we gotta really try to look at that, because if we don't, like all this movement, Winchester's really gonna be doubly packed people, because I know I'm looking for the free area, right? But if you make it more inviting for people to, be able to afford to pay, this might not, you said it's reasonable, you got a good job.
Oh, 812 is not, but I meant to say that the student rate, no one's gonna pay. But the faculty and staff rates, that is what I was trying to say.
You got a good job.
Yeah.
Everybody will
Yeah,
make what you
yeah.
make, right? They got a job, but it might not be the best job. And to save 100 and something a month just to go to work, to park, that might be a whole daycare bill. That might be a lot. And so for me, my area, because it's the area that's gonna be most affected, because we don't have all these restrictions. I'm looking at you guys to see what it is that you can do, because this parking plan is going to affect the neighborhoods. Even though you all got your numbers and, hey, you got a 54 person, extra, all of that's coming over into the communities, and that area is already very dense. And so those 1, 2 parking spaces, 20 parking spaces that your staff is taking, that's taken away from the community. We have a lot of people that work third shift, right? They come home in the morning, they gotta park 10 blocks down the street because your staff, not even just your staff, the people that are building the buildings, oh, they love to take up all the parking. So we gotta figure out, one, where can we put these trucks and all these things when you're building stuff? Where can you put that? And two, how can you make the fees more attractive and affordable for all? And like I said, you go to the doctor's office, you show that you make 20,000 versus you make 100,000, our prices are going to be different. And we, as a university, you guys are going to need to look at that, because I don't have the room or capacity, and I don't want everybody steadily knocking on my door saying, Jeanette, I cannot find somewhere to park near my house. So, thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Morrison. Alderman Shaw?
Thank you. Perhaps I could use that. Thank you, Alder Wingate. Thank you for your presentation. I'm always excited to talk about parking and to read overall parking plans. Get to do it a lot. It's an important ordinance for the city. Yale's one of the entities that has access to overall parking plan. Most developments that get approved, the parking is per each building, right? And so it's handled building by building by building by building. But entities that have overall parking plans can actually look at the total ensemble of their parking facilities in relation to their multi-building campus. And it's something that's been in our ordinance for some decades now. We revised it in 2013, creating the current process that we have. And there's two in our city: the Central Science Campus, just this side of town, and then there's the medical area overall parking plan, which encompasses Yale New Haven Hospital, Hospital St. Raphael's, the Connecticut Mental Health Center, and Yale University Medical School. So we have two overall parking plans, and this is the Central Science Campus one. I agree with what my colleague said about the cost. I speak to workers every day at Yale, and they are parking elsewhere. There's a reason why there's a surplus in your system. It's because people don't want to pay that much money. And so they end up parking on Mansfield, which is not in the study area. Winchester, all the way up towards Albertus Magnus, actually. They park on Canner, they park on you name it, they park. And they take the shuttle, which is a rational thing for an individual to do. Think about it. Can I park in a residential neighborhood, get out of my car, walk to the blue line stop at Willow and Whitney, and take the bus in, the Yale shuttle? It's a rational strategy. And, if it's only a few people doing it, then maybe it's not a big inconvenience for the neighborhood, but it happens enough that it becomes an inconvenience for the neighborhood. And so I think the logic that our director of TTMP laid out around people making rational choices, actually, there's a whole other choices that make a lot more sense than what you described. And it's parking up north and taking the shuttle down. And there aren't enforcement resources going to Winchester Avenue at Division, for example. There just isn't. So the overall parking plan for Central Science Campus ends up having a spillover effect in a pretty vast swath of that part of town. And that's a concern for the elders in the area. I think we might hear from one or two of them. So I just wanted to make that quick comment, and forgive me, I'm now going to get to a question. I'm looking at the parking inventory chart. I think it's attachment, perhaps A, attachment B. And I'm glad I brought my reading glasses, because I was looking at that footnote, and it talks about 80% versus 70%, kind of like typical utilization of the total inventory, right? You use that discount rate, I'm just going to use that term, as a way of saying what your utilization is, right? There's a surplus of spaces because only 80% of all the people paying the monthly fees are going to use it, right? So you don't use 100%, because then there would be a smaller surplus. But I understand why you do it, because not everybody parks there every day. So I just want to understand more about how you came up with that discount. Is it based on long-standing utilization? There's something in the footnote about technology that enables you to measure that. And then I want a little bit more on the remote work phenomenon and how that's affecting your current thinking on that percentage and maybe future thinking on that percentage as well. Thank you.
Back in 2022, sort of in the middle time of the pandemic, we were concerned about designing a facility, not necessarily the garage, but also targeting a certain amount of parking spaces, which would accommodate both this project as well as other projects as well. So what we wanted to do is, as Mr. Hamer pointed out, not overbuild, meaning that we wanted to be respective of that particular utilization. And so we, Yale Parking Office, with what's referred to in technology, they had upgraded their technology at the certain gates, gated lots as well as gated, of course, garages. And they had better monitoring system, so they can obviously monitor people coming and going and coming up with data that they had never had access to before. So with this new technology, we asked them in cooperation, in partnership, that let's do a utilization study, do 3 months at a time at certain peak months, certainly not in the summer, but we did one swath between, let's say, September and December, and then another one at January through March or April, and we did it twice, okay? And so the first one, we did that, and with their technology, they came up with 70% overall in the gated properties. And so the leadership of the university said, well, 70% is good. However, we want to buffer that because things can change. And so we wanted to at least buffer it by 10% because we don't know the extent of the pandemic. We don't know the extent of the utilization. So let's back off 10%. So that's at least the basis to your first question. And so at that point in 2022, we presented that to the alders, and it was endorsed and approved within the 2022 OPP. And so we've done sort of spot checks along the way, and it's holding 80%. well, it's holding at 70%, but still with that buffer of 10%.
Mhm.
And so the follow-up to that, meaning that looking ahead is part of your question.
Mhm.
As Mr. Hamer pointed out, we can't predict the university policies of work at home rather than work in the office. Things can change. Administrations have different ideas of how the employee should work, whether remotely or in the office. So we were, again, trying to build in some flexibility and keep the 80%, even though we knew post-pandemic, even post-pandemic, 80% was holding. It's even better than 70% as well in some cases. And so in terms of giving that sort of bottom line buffer, meaning that if you talk with our Yale parking administration, they need, in order to really have parking function through peak periods as well as normal periods. Peak periods meaning special occasions on campus, seminars, larger events. They need that sort of buffer to settle in on and be comfortable and not hopefully displace people or put too much tightness to the contingency. So I don't know if I'm answering your question definitively, but we can't necessarily predict the future university policies for remote work, and so we're sort of holding back a little more on the contingency in case it expands.
Thank you. I appreciate that response, which was helpful. Mr. And Ms. Co-chairs, I have one more question to ask now. I would like to later on, I see that the engineer from Time and Bond is here who conducted the street parking. I know him because I see him at City Plan every month practically. And I would like to talk to them, whether that's after the public portion or later. I would like to do that.
I think it would be appropriate, Madam Co-Chair, if we were to invite them to the table now.
Yes.
Great. So while the engineer's coming forward, the question for the university policy making people here is alternate modes of transportation for commuters. There's material in our packet about the various programs that you run to incent and support people doing ride shares and taking the bus and so on. Are you thinking about additional incentives or programs that would help to move people out of single occupancy cars and into other forms of transportation? I say this because the overall parking plan, Yale's a huge institution and parking is impacted by people coming, but so is traffic. And so if there are fewer people driving, then there's less traffic as well, which has an impact on the quality of life. So I don't know if there's any information you have about like the next level thinking that you're considering around helping people to get out of their cars.
Steve, in terms of any future demand management actions that are being.
I would ask our director of Yale administration, George Longyear, to respond to that.
Thank you.
Can we perhaps get another trip? We'll give him a chair.
So
And
is
then
that,
if you all can just shift down.
Sure.
And then, Madam Clerk, I think when everyone is seated, we need to get the official names
absolutely.
and address for the record.
How are you?
Great, one big happy family.
So prior to proceeding, we're gonna get names and addresses for the record, please.
Christopher Granatini. I'm a professional engineer with Ty and Bond with an office located at 213 Court Street in Middletown, Connecticut.
Good evening, my name is George Longyear Jr. I'm the Director of Administrative Services at Yale, and my office is at 2 Whitney Grove, Whitney Avenue.
Thank you.
So Mr. Longyear, you probably heard my question about future thinking or new programs that you're considering in terms of how to support and incent people moving from single occupancy vehicles into ride sharing or public transit or other forms, biking, other forms of transportation. So if you have anything to add, we'd be grateful to hear.
Sure.
The university is always considering other options that currently, in addition to what currently exists on campus. One of the things with the rideshare program that we have from our Quigley Stadium in West Haven brings in around 200 of our community members into campus every single day. We're looking to figure out how do we enhance that. Can we possibly do something similar to what Yale New Haven Hospital does with running shuttles from different parts of the state, the shoreline, Milford area, and the Hampton, North Haven area to campus. We're constantly looking at those. Our carpool program, van pool program, is a very popular program. We roughly have around 500 members that participate in that, anywhere from 2 to 3 person carpool system. We're always trying to encourage that to members of our community. It helps offset their parking fees, and it could be split either by 2 or 3, depending on how many participate in the pool. We've seen a large number of increases in carpools since the return back to campus post-COVID, which has been a significant increase for us. And we continuously look at all other options that are possibly available to us in terms of incentivizing our community. We have a sustainability office that is very particular about tracking all those type of sustainability initiatives in terms of reducing single occupancy vehicles coming to campus every single day, and how best to do that. We have incentives right now with Shoreline East and the train stations. We've been looking at possibly dealing with the state with the UPass program that they have. So we're looking at all those different options.
Thank you, Mr. Winier. Appreciate that response. My question for the engineer, which you might have heard, is I just want to know more about the methodology. I read through the report, and it seems to me that you picked a day to go to these surface streets at various times of the day to kind of count how many spaces were open versus spaces were closed. And so, and I noticed that it was in the East Rock side of the Science Hill campus, not so much the Prospect Hill or New Hallville or the Dixwell side of that. So I just want to know more about your methodology, what defined your area that you were looking at, and then tell me more about how that one day that you chose could like stand for more than just that day. It could be seen as a representative day.
Thank you.
Okay, so the methodology, as we looked at the regulation and, worked with Yale to kind of try to understand where the current parking that is being affected by the project resides and where it was going to be affected, we looked at what was like a reasonable walking distance. If you were to say, I don't want to park on Science Hill, how far would I reasonably go and walk back to that location where I would be able to park on a daily basis? And so we looked at if you were going to kind of gravitate more towards the center of campus and then down Hill House and Prospect Street. We went up St. Roden Street, which is directly adjacent to the place where the garages are coming down. And then we looked at the neighborhood directly to the east. And it was about a half a mile, which is like a 5 to 8 minute walk to walk that distance. And so from a methodology perspective, and to try to do something that was like reasonable for someone that was parking there now to displace and go park in the neighborhood, we looked at a reasonable walking distance. We looked at the parking regulations on those streets, so that we would understand like what we were studying relative to what the demand is today. And that was really the basis of it, was like, what's the area of influence of Science Hill relative to the surrounding neighborhood? To do the study, we went out and did an additional survey and kind of documented all the existing parking spaces, all the associated parking regulations, so that we had a full kind of inventory of the streets. And then we had 2 staff spend the day on campus and walk the campus on all of our survey periods, documenting who was in the parking spaces on every one of those survey periods. And then we looked at utilization for each of those periods throughout the day. It's hard to say what a average day is, because every day is average unless it's not, right? From our perspective, like we can only, from a reasonable perspective, you can't survey every day, because you're always gonna have variations in parking, so we pick a day when school was in session, when normal schools were in session. It was a nice weather day, so if people wanted to park in the neighborhoods, it wasn't like inclement and they wouldn't be able to. And so we tried to kind of pick a day that was just like every other day during the school year, when school was in session, normal schools were in session, people were working, and that's when we did our survey.
Thank you for that information. I appreciate it. Just one more question. Thank you.
Mhm.
Which is, you chose the distance to be like a reasonable walking distance from the Science Hill campus.
Yep.
Half mile or less. But you didn't think about a reasonable bus ride or Yale shuttle ride from the Science Hill campus? I mean, that would have made it bigger and harder to do, of course, but so why did you just decide like a reasonable walk as opposed to a reasonable something else from the site?
Because I think for the purposes of what we were looking at under this study, it was how is the project essentially going to influence parking behaviors? And I guess what you're asking is existing parking behaviors are what they are. And if there are things that are happening that are not desirable, but there are rules and enforceable regulations that are around the campus that would facilitate ticketing people that are parking in under like permit neighborhoods. Our thought was, if someone was on the campus now, and would they be displaced by the project and thinking about moving off of Science Hill and going to park in these immediately adjacent areas? So like a change in current behavior was what we were studying as part of like this project. That was kind of what we talked about with Yale about how to meet the regulatory requirement of the project's impact.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm not sure I agree with that, but I thank you for that and I understand it. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Alder Rodriguez. Thank you. I have a few questions if I may. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. The first question that I have, if you may tell me, how do you define the Science Hill area?
Science Hill area, includes the science block as well as a reasonable walking distance, say from the north part of the Science Hill area, let's say 3 or 4 minute walk from the north, and then in the west side of Prospect, because that's not necessarily the science block. The block is defined by Prospect, Edwards, Whitney, and Sachem. So by definition, that's the block, but the Science Hill area goes beyond like 1 block, let's say to the west along Prospect. It goes a little beyond, let's say where Greenberg is, to the north where Marsh Gardens is, and it goes a little toward the east as well.
I'm sorry, I was kind of looking more, so is it based on the buildings that are related to medicine and science?
No,
At
it
the university?
has to do with walking distance.
Okay. Because I see here that on the shuttle routes, you present all the way like from Huntington, Canner, Division, all the way down, and you include Columbus Avenue, you include Cedar Street, you include all these streets. So if you can, are you including the School of Medicine also here?
Sure, Alder, I can try to help. What we did
Thank you.
as part of just showing you what the university's demand management efforts are, we essentially attached all of the shuttle routes university-wide that are part of the annual OPP filing. But to your point, it includes areas that are far removed from Science Hill in terms of the shuttles that are being shown. But that's the way it appears in the OPP yearly filing. So we gave you the whole package.
So does it include the School of Medicine?
The Science Hill area.
No.
Okay.
No.
I'm stemming around the fact that there's a problem here. And as my colleague, Alder Morrison, shared, that many individuals don't prefer to park, and also you shared that there's a surplus in parking. and also the use of shuttle buses to get around. Now, in my area, where my ward, we have the School of Medicine. I mean, I understand it's not, doesn't have to do with the Science-Ville area. However, we too see the constant issues surrounding parking individuals. Now, have you thought in terms of community development and partnering, the opportunity of allowing residents to park? Some sort of a program, something that if the students continue or the individuals who work at Yale want to continue to park in our neighboring streets surrounding the areas where they work, then perhaps maybe we should start establishing some sort of a partnership where then we can have residents who can be able to park in your parking areas. So that would kind of alleviate a bit the crisis that we are encountering, because permit, no permit, restrictions, no restrictions, no restrictions, they're still gonna park. And the fact is that it's easy for them to walk. But what about the residents that need to go to certain places and have to park and pay for parking when they live right there and they easily walk to where they need to go? So just, have you thought of some sort of a partnering in that kind to alleviate the crisis that's going on with the university and the neighbors? Thank you.
Excuse me, Alder, I just also want to point out the area that you're referring to and appreciate what you're referring to and what your concerns are. But I just wanted to point out that's not in this parking plan that's before you. That's in the medical area parking plan, which includes Yale New Haven
Yeah, and I
Hospital.
appreciate that, I do understand
Yeah.
that, but
I
we
do
still-
appreciate that,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair,
Rodriguez,
but we
I-
are still encountering the
Yeah,
same
but I would
problem
like to have,
over there.
I would like you just to answer the alder, even though we're not
No, I understand.
discussing that this evening.
Yeah.
If you can give her a quick answer.
Thank you.
I'm aware of that plan, but Mr. Longier would be able to address if there was a plan, any ever discussed on that.
So it has
And
not.
then we'll get back to what's at hand after you answer.
Sure. We have not had that conversation in terms of understanding that relationship, but we do open our lots down in your ward. Several of our lots are open every evening, open to the public. We also open our lots during inclement weather so that residents of the city of New Haven can move their cars in off the street so that they could park within our facility, and then we worry about taking care of our facility later on and moving snow. Our only concern with that would be that our parking is paying parkers for members of the community, and that we want to make sure that if they're paying, they have ample parking, and if we're offset by others that are not part of our community because we're opening up to the New Haven residents, it may become a problem, but something worth exploring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is that satisfactory for you, Alder?
Yes, that
Rodriguez?
is very
Okay.
supportive.
Thank you for answering.
Thank you.
Alder Wingate?
Thank you, chairs, chairs and co-chairs. Thank you. My apologies for being late to the team. Talking about pay scale. Now I want to talk about pay scale a little bit in this particular setting. Facilities have a large group of custodians on campus that work like 4 a.m. That comes in at 4 a.m. and then some come at 6. That comes in, park, leave at 11:30, 12 o'clock. Has there been any thought around prorating a lot for them? Because if they come in, they wouldn't park on the street because a lot of them don't use the parking lots because the pay scale, right? To my Alder Morrison point, is a pay scale that go up and down. And perhaps we want to think of options around using a voucher of some sort for these employees that come in. because a lot of our employees, it was like a catch-22 for me, right? Because we want the city to get the parking tickets paid, but I don't want the employees that get the parking tickets. It's part of facilities, right? So I don't know if I thought about that in reference to having that group do like a prorated park in the parking lots, because they are out at 12 o'clock, right? And perhaps there could be a voucher system, right? If we market this right for that group that don't want to pay the monthly parking. That's my 2 cents.
Is that a question?
Yeah, it was a couple of questions in there. This is a couple of statements in there, a couple of questions, George.
Okay.
Come on, George.
So we do look at several options in terms of monthly pay. So to give you an example with the remote hybrid work that we're involved in now since COVID came along, we do provide what we call daily debit stays. So we have members of our community that can pay by day and be able to park in certain facilities here on campus. That has also been a new success for us. One problem with doing a reduced rate for those on off-shift hours is the concern that we have when we looked at it really in depth, Brian, is that if we give somebody a reduced rate because they're working the second or third shift, and all of a sudden they bid a new job onto the first shift, we have no way of knowing that, and they're still parking in the same location at a cheaper price. And so we're figuring out how could we work around that, and are there solutions available to do that? But listen, we're very happy to work with the unions at Yale to kind of figure out those solutions. And I think you probably know a good union representative that'd be happy to work with me in terms of figuring that out.
Alderman, another question?
I just want to respond to Mr. Longier, if I may. I am open to working with you, Mr. Longier, on that task for parking.
Okay, we're gonna tighten this up. We're gonna tighten this up. Let's get back to the subject at hand. Let's remember, colleagues, we're going by last name, and if you would please refer to us as Alder because we're in committee. And then we'll all be good. Who else do we have on queue?
Alder
Madam
Saban.
Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair. So I have 2 questions. The first is the surplus, and maybe this is in here, but I didn't quite understand. The surplus that's referred to of 1,336 spaces, is that the surplus relative to the number of spaces that are required of the university to provide under city zoning ordinances, or is that the surplus that you feel that you have measured that you have based on how many people are using the spaces that you have available?
It's a surplus percentage based on the number of spaces in total that actually exist, or that are assigned. Right, the 1,336 is based on the number of spaces in the overall system, not based on a zoning requirement.
The latter, not the former.
Okay, and do you have on hand the number of spaces that are required under the zoning ordinance
That was a question that came up back years ago when the Board of Alders for the first time was reviewing the overall parking plan for the first time, because they took that responsibility from what had been with BZA previous. I know Alder Marchand was part of that. It's very difficult to even attempt to try to figure out what zoning would require, in the sense that so many of the Yale buildings were built years before there was zoning, and it's sort of a mixed bag in terms of grandfathered from parking requirements from zoning altogether, et cetera. So I think as a practical matter, the OPP management is really, it's primarily on a needs and actual demands of parking. Let's meet what they are and have enough spaces so that everything can function adequately. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I think the zoning standard may also not, it may be overstated in some respects as well, but it's sort of a living, actual what is our experience on the OPP numbers that you're looking at?
If I may just add something, I just want to clarify, it's not solely based on an algorithm, a percentage. If you'll see in Exhibit B, we know our available spaces that exist, the physical spaces, and then we know which ones are assigned. And that the main calculation that's going into the surplus number is just what's not assigned. So I just want to make sure, in case it sounds like it's a little bit more of a math equation, it's not. It's a lot more about counting what's there, counting what's assigned, and then the delta is what's left over in the surplus.
And by assigned, you mean, obviously, those are ones that somebody has paid for, so they are using it, but are there some unassigned spaces that are also being used?
Unassigned, George.
Yes, and I can speak to those. Those are our daily debit space. So those are, you buy a block a period of time, and you could utilize those at any given day of the week. So we roughly have around 400 people, as I mentioned earlier, that are part of that daily debit space program. Any of those 400 could park on any given day of the week. And
Okay. So I guess my concern is that when you talk about a surplus, but you're also setting the price for parking spaces, you're sort of controlling what the surplus is to some extent. If you set the price for the parking spots at $100,000 and nobody would pay it, then you would have maybe 5,064 spaces in your surplus as you measured it. So to say that there's a surplus, meaning that there isn't demand for those spaces, I'm not sure if I would agree with that exactly, because you're deciding whether people want those spaces by setting the price for them. So I guess this sort of goes back to the point my colleagues have made, that I think the spillover that we're seeing in our neighborhoods is directly connected to, not necessarily, it's possible that you have the right number of parking spaces, but the prices are too high, and so people are choosing to park in neighborhoods instead of in the spaces that are available. And I mean, I think if you currently have like 25% of the available spaces aren't being used, that would suggest that the prices are too high. So I don't know if you have any response to that.
George or Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the surplus is, apart from what's assigned or not assigned, it's also just with remote work habits. For example, how many days a week are various parkers even bringing their car to work or coming to the office? So that's a large part of what we're talking about, I believe.
That's right.
But I think on the flip side, if they set the prices way too high, then things aren't going to function properly on your end if you don't have parking that's both available, convenient, and workable for people. But please,
we do carefully monitor market rate, and we try to track our rates accordingly. And so, if there's a Grove Street garage, which is privately owned, and they have a particular rate, we try to make sure that we're within that. We also work with the New Haven Parking Authority in terms of how they set their rates and things on that. So we track all the other public parking around the city of New Haven on an annual basis. We make sure that we're kind of in line with market rate.
But I would add to what Mr. Longier said, that I think the market rate is on the top sliding scale of the income. So based on income, the rates are below market rate for people who are not in the top income tier. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, and one other point, which I think is important, when COVID first hit, we stopped charging people in our community for parking. So for over 2 years, no one paid for parking, and then in the last year they paid that 50% rate. We also, during that time, we paid our full contingent of parkers, even though they weren't being utilized, to the New Haven Parking Authority for all of our lease lots, for Temple Street, Crown Street, Air Rights Garage. We paid our full stipend, even though we knew people weren't coming in terms of supporting the New Haven Parking Authority on this. So while the rates may seem high, there has been a couple years of a break for folks in terms of the fee basis, and our level of parkers has either remained consistent post-COVID to where we're at today, or just slightly over. So it's not like there's been a drop as a result of the rates.
If I may add, thinking about, you're absolutely right, price is an input into the output of how many people are coming into the garage, right? But another output of that is how many people are spilling over into the neighborhood. And there's more that we can be doing. I genuinely would be welcome. I've in conversations with alders about Yale relations in general, parking comes up all the time, and we're genuinely very open to creative ideas on what we could be doing differently. I would say pricing is one element, but we also have to consider that Alderman Marchand mentioned, the more people that drive in, the more traffic there is. We don't want people parking in neighborhoods, but we also don't want more traffic in our neighborhoods. And so we do try to find that balance where we are making our parking not so inexpensive that all of a sudden everyone is flooding in single person cars when they could be taking advantage of the long list of alternates that Mr. Longyear's office spends a lot of time coming up with and advertising to our employees. So it is a balance. It's a lot of math and it's also a lot of judgment. And we're trying to find that line where we are not overbuilding parking, not underbuilding parking, not pushing too many people into the neighborhoods, but also not letting everybody flood in their car, flooding our intersections and flooding our neighborhoods with people coming in from other cities. So I know that's not a mathematic answer, but we don't want to over rotate in any one direction and have another bad impact come out on the other side.
I just want to kind of clarify all of Marsha's point. Well taken. I mean, I understand these numbers are not always the same thing. Right? I mean, it's not all about numbers. Like a $80 thing, it may have an effect because when you read these surveys around the pricing structure, you do, preference-based survey, whatever those kind of surveys you do, kind of build these models. They're not the be-all and end-all. Essentially, I recognize that. I think the effects in these neighborhoods, this is just a general point. The point is the city is growing so fast, and I kind of said that in the previous meetings, that these cities are a different new normal now. So we're growing fast, a lot of mixed-use development, then you have, variances for not providing parking on-site, and, residential parking zones, that dynamic around having a residential parking zone next to a street that does not have a residential parking zone. And then garages, the pricing structure, it's very complicated. We haven't, I mean, honestly, I'll be very honest, we haven't gotten to even like 1% of where we should have, information on what's happening citywide. As a department, we are thinking about it seriously. Just cities too big to kind of figure out what the demand is and what the supply is. But we are trying to figure out what's really happening in the city, in relationship with all the development that's happening, in proximity to all these garages and lots that are there, the pricing structure on those things. I think it's true to the point that we've observed, I mean, this is just anecdotal, we've observed when we did park utilization for a study recently, we did a comprehensive hourly utilization in East Rock along Orange Street and all side streets. And I believe there are 2,000 spaces in that area, and it's typically around 60% utilized as a system-wide. But we noticed certain places there, as you come into the city, certain blocks are fully utilized, and we noticed vehicles are parked for more than 8 hours a day. There could be a mix of those vehicles, students who actually own a car, live in that front of the house and park their vehicles and then just walk to their campus, right? That's one, we don't know who's who. But then you also have this, employees and faculty employees who may be living in Hampton, mostly staff, because faculty probably can't afford, these kind of monthly fees. But it's probably going to be majority staff at the lower pay scale. There is that definitely they will park on, Upper Winchester, East Rock, way out there, and take the shuttle. Because the transportation system is so good that it's like, I may sound like I'm talking on both sides of the mouth, but it's a challenge. It's a dynamic that's very hard to figure out because there's this push and pull sort of dynamics here. Because and then we don't have, the city also has like the pricing structure too, right? We may have a block that has meters and then a block next to it, maybe unmetered, and it may have like a 5-hour limit, and that happens too, right? And we may send enforcement out, but not enough staffing to kind of, kind of capture the whole buffer area of the transit buffer area. We may capture the walking buffer area, but not the transit buffer area. And that's a problem that we are wrestling with. I'll be very honest, we don't have an answer, but we are thinking about it day in, day out. I mean, Eric and I are deputy thinking, what do we kind of do? We need to get a handle on what's really happening. The city's growing so fast. And it puts these pressures on neighborhoods. The CPC, the City Plan Commission recommendation, City Plan recommendation said, and which we do during site plan reviews, that the construction, vehicles to create a parking management plan. Right? We've done that. That's one of the recommendations here. And I completely agree with that. But the thing is, there needs to be that maybe developing a partnership, like Alder Rodriguez sort of mentioned. Maybe there's some other innovative way or some pricing structure around what you were talking about. Maybe the pricing is too low or too high. I don't know exactly the answer. To your point, if someone we charge $700,000, I'm sure there'll be somebody else, will be afford to can afford to pay $100,000 for a parking space. But the idea here is that it's a very complicated issue, and it's something that we need to, I'll be happy to work with the board of orders to kind of like address that issue long term. And I think we also need stakeholders like Yale to be part of that, equation to kind of address that challenge. We get a lot of complaints on Alder Rodriguez's ward, like about construction vehicles sort of parked in residential parking zones or in non-residential parking zones. And that's a challenge, right? Because and that happens even with all the Yale stuff, some of this stuff. But my general point was that, based on at least a study, it doesn't seem like it has impact, but you're right, the study is not everything. There are a lot of stuff that happens real world that we experience. When I say experience, I notice it working. And with your interaction with all the alders here saying, hey, my resident cannot find parking. And I think I have to address that, but again, I just want to kind of state that clearly that it's a very complicated issue. I think it requires, deeper level of thinking and, some policy level, kind of changes around it. And, I think Yale should be part of that discussion.
Thank you. I guess I just want to ask one more question about, so you mentioned that there have been some changes to the pricing during the pandemic, and it's mentioned here on page 17 that the fiscal year 23 parking rates were at 50% of 2019 levels. And I was wondering, just to make clear, the parking fee schedule that is provided, is that fiscal year 24? Not fiscal year 23. So these are not the discounted parking rates. Is that correct? This says rates effective July.
These are effective July 1st, 2023.
So that's fiscal year 24. So not the discount. Okay. And then I think one thing through the chairs it would be helpful to have would be the daily debit pricing structure, just to be able to understand. Because one thing that I think is also relevant here is, you mentioned that there may be less parking demand because people are working remotely, but also that means that people maybe think that these prices don't make as much sense for them because if they're only coming into New Haven once or twice a week, then they don't want to pay for a monthly pass, and so instead they'll take a risk on Tuesday and Wednesday that they'll park, in the neighborhood. And hopefully won't get it.
Yeah, so we carefully looked at that when we were setting that rate, and currently is at $20. Okay. So the delta is roughly 3 days before it's better off to buy a monthly parking permit.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Would you state your request again?
Well, I think we've received
clarified enough for you. Yes. Alder, okay.
Any?
Mo.
We're good? Alder Rodriguez?
Are there any questions in regard to this,
Yes.
this overall parking plan that we're voting on this evening?
Okay, in reference to the plans that you have, are you going to be needing additional space for parking? Thank you.
I'm sorry, Alder, did you mean plans like for other projects?
For the plans regarding the construction, the new construction, are you going to be using new areas to continue the development of the project? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the physical sciences and engineering building project will be done with what we're proposing tonight. And as I said earlier, any new projects, which may be in other areas of the Yale campus, if they require a zoning application, we will be back to the alders to review the parking associated with those projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would also mention, as it was mentioned, yeah, okay, thank you, I think I answered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from colleagues? Okay, thank you.
We thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And we'll go to the public portion now, see if anyone would like to testify on this item. So you're
Thank you.
welcome to
Thank you very much.
have a seat and wait around and see what happens.
Would I just ask Mr. Chair, will we have another opportunity, or is this it right now?
Is there something more you wanted to
Yeah, I guess just
say?
very,
Certainly.
very quickly, a couple of, just a couple of thoughts. I guess in terms of the matter that's before you, the request for amendment related to these two zoning applications, which we've been discussing. Obviously, the question, the core issue is whether the net reduction of 175 can be adequately accommodated, and we believe we've demonstrated that it can, that there's adequate surplus, and that it won't push Parkers into the streets. And to the extent that there are any existing neighborhood parking issues, if they're partially contributed to by Yale Parkers or whoever is causing them, they will not be increased as a result of anything that we're proposing here with the 175 space reduction. And I think there were a lot of very important other topics that were discussed, which we appreciate that various alders have raised. And whether it's the fee structure on the parking, whether it's the number of tickets that the city has written in the residential areas. But, respectfully, I think those are sort of longer term issues and discussions, which I know the university is happy to continue to engage in with you. But in terms of what's before you tonight, we respectfully would request that you act favorably on it this evening to allow us to continue through the other regulatory processes, the zoning process that we're in the midst of. And last thing, you have it in your package, but the City Planning Commission did issue a favorable advice recommendation report to you. But we thank you very much for your time and attention, and if there are any other questions that come up, we're happy to answer them.
We thank you for fine tuning what we discussed tonight, but we have several alders here that live in these neighborhoods, and a reduction of 175 parking spaces certainly has an impact, and I think that everything that we discussed here this evening is relevant to what we're going to be voting on tonight. But we thank you for your presentation, and we invite you to stay around and listen to public testimony, because it's possible that after public testimony, we may ask you to answer some questions. Thank you. Madam Co-Chair, do you have a list of those that want to testify this evening?
I have not received the list. Thank you, sir.
Over Douglas?
Over Douglas.
Let's, yeah.
Absolutely.
I have Angel Hubbard. Good evening. Your name and address for the record?
I'm reading the testimony for Angel Hubbard. She couldn't make it. I'm Abby Feldman.
And address for the record, please?
My address, 17 Stevenson Road.
Thank you.
My name is Angel Hubbard, and I reside at 27 Elliott Street in the Hill. As a Hill resident, I see the burden that Yale puts on our neighborhood. Our streets are overcrowded with cars. My daughter has health issues, and I'm often concerned about the additional exhaust that these cars bring into our streets. I see workers walking from street parking in scrubs, and the streets fill up during the weekdays. So my guess is that at least some of these workers work at Yale. If Yale provides enough parking for their workers, why are our streets full of cars? Why is the city providing the parking that Yale should provide? Why are representatives from Yale now arguing that they need even less parking? I'm not a parking advocate, and I believe that parking should not come at the cost of things like affordable housing. But even on the issue of housing, I'm concerned that the issues that Yale's parking creates. My neighbors are upset when they have to park a block or two away from their home. When they hear about proposals to bring more housing into the Hill, they then worry about overcrowding on the streets. So if Yale managed its parking differently, would these tensions already be so high?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Has that testimony been sent? I believe it provided. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee?
Thank you.
Dolores Cologne? Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Dolores Colon, and I live at 34 Salem Street. Parking is congested and a big issue in the New Haven residence areas, especially for those with close proximity to Yale. This change proposed to the overall parking plan shows that Yale will be reducing parking by 175 spaces when any other developer would be required to add 76 additional parking spaces. With these new facilities, Yale anticipates growing by 96 employees, 120 new students, and 8 faculty. A decrease in parking affects us all, not just Yale employees, but all New Haven residents. It is also important to our quality of life as a former alder in the Hill and current co-chair of the Democratic Town Committee. I have heard many parking concerns from neighbors, some of whom have had to park 2 or 3 blocks away from their doors after getting home from working the night shift. We all know Yale is growing. The Science and Engineering Building in Science Hill would be almost as large as the Yale Bowl. And Yale is in the middle of a $7 billion capital campaign that has been raising money for new construction across the campus. As Yale grows, New Haven must grow. And as a community, we review this proposal and get ready to watch the buildings go up. Let's remember what matters most. Space for our New Haven residents to thrive in safe, affordable neighborhoods with good quality of life into the future without fears of being displaced or pushed out. Another thing I want to add is that as Yale grows, our families have been growing. Our children are graduating from colleges with skills that would qualify them. And I want to emphasize that our children are graduating colleges with skills that would qualify for them to have jobs in these science and engineering buildings. If you hired locally, there would be no need for someone to drive to work. They could walk to work from the Dixwell, New Hallville area or the Hill area, or take a shuttle from the medical school area, which there's a shuttle from the med school area that takes you right to the science area. As a former co-chair of the Black and Hispanic Caucus, in 2015, I made a speech about jobs crisis. Well, there's still a job crisis because our kids are graduating colleges and not getting jobs at the university. They rather hire someone from Middletown, Connecticut, Guilford, before they hire someone from our community, even though they're qualified. So hire locally, and you don't have to worry about parking. And also, the rate of parking is based on how much people earn. I worked at Yale for 30 years, and every time someone got a raise, usually around February, their parking went up. So it's not just based on market rate, it's based on how much an employee makes, that's how much you pay. That's for the record.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the committee
Oh,
for former Alder Cologne? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Renee Reed.
Alder Cologne, if you can leave your testimony with staff.
Yes, of
Thank you.
course. The little notes, you have questions about the notes.
That's not really
Hello, Alders. I am Eddie Kemp. I reside at 165 Cohary Drive, and I'm reading the testimony for Renee Reed. So the testimony is, my name is Renee Reed, and I live at 260 Colony Road. I work as a senior administrative assistant at Yale University, and I have worked at Yale for 25 years. Even with a good job, I, like many of my colleagues, cannot afford the $125 per month that Yale University charges for parking. For me, it is a choice between paying for my health care or paying for parking. I cannot do both. Obviously, my choice is to pay for my health care and try my luck at finding parking spaces on the street. The fact is that I am not alone. Many of my coworkers cannot afford to pay the rates that Yale University charges for parking. So I ask you, what has Yale done? By pricing out their workers, they keep vacant spots in their parking lots. Meanwhile, workers park on the streets where we all know parking is already very scarce. We end up with empty parking lots and overcrowded streets. Meanwhile, Yale can point to the vacant spots as evidence that they need less parking. I believe that Yale University should invest significantly more in our city. It should help build up a public transportation system that could justify less parking while making the street parking near campus less scarce. It should also lower the cost of parking for workers so its current lots are utilized and the burden on the city is eased. Until they take these steps, I personally do not find the arguments that they should provide even less parking credit. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
I had made a note and I didn't read it's about, this is, again, Dolores Cologne, 34 Salem Street. The man that took the survey of the parking during the weekdays at various times, I have a comment for him. Did they, or a question, did they come to the neighborhoods in the weekends? Because they could see the dramatic drop in parking on our streets in the Hill, in Winchester Avenue, in Mansfield Street. I had the privilege of working for 18 months at 344 Winchester, and I had the need to go there during the weekends, just like in my neighborhood. It was a ghost town, no parking, no cars parked, just a few. The streets were basically free of parked cars. And that's the same in my neighborhood. I live on the other side of the campus by the medical school, the old school of nursing, former Lee High School.
Mm-hmm.
And they all park across on the other side, the southern side of Columbus Avenue. And if these parking experts or observers had gone there during the weekend, they would find plenty of parking, which our residents do not find when they come home from work. That's my little note here.
Thank you.
Is that in the area that we're talking about here?
No, but it's a science area, and the same thing is true of Mansfield Street, Winchester Avenue, which is on the west side of this Science Hill, and that's where they're parking. That's why he doesn't see them on the streets in St. Roman, because they're parking on Mansfield on Winchester Avenue, and I can testify to that as I am doing right now.
Any questions for former Alder Cologne?
Welcome back.
Thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you. You're very welcome. Am I wrong, Aldous, from that area?
So we're not allowed to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah. We're just listening to testimony tonight. Anyone else?
Anyone else from the public that wish to testify? For a second time, anyone from the public wishing to testify? Third request, anyone from the public wishing to testify?
I make a motion.
Before we do that, I don't know if it's necessary to have the presenters give an answer to the last testimony. If you're fine with us moving forward, then we're okay with that, but there was a question. And so it would be appropriate to ask you to answer, but it's not obligatory.
Mr. Chair, I guess I'm not sure, focused on the specific question that you were thinking of, because.
With the last testimony that dealt with parking in other areas and the, what the engineer had presented for their study and the sections that they did not look at, which was along
The hill section.
Winchester, Mansfield.
I think.
During the weekend.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, give us your name and address again.
Attorney Joseph Hammer, 110 Whitney Avenue, New Haven. Thank you.
Thank you.
A couple things. So consistent with the ordinance regarding overall parking plan amendments, the on-street parking study was done in the surrounding area of the Science Hill block where the project will be located. So that survey did not get into the hill area, which also is in a different overall parking plan. It's not in the central science plan, it's in the medical area plan. In terms of whether or not studies were done on the weekend, they were not, because the purpose of the study was really to look at the weekdays when people will be at their jobs and examine what available parking or attractive parking there might be in the surrounding area to this block. So the weekend condition really doesn't speak to whether it's going to be attractive to them, even as a result of this project as substitute parking on the weekday work week. So I hope that helps to answer a little bit just in terms of what the study focused on. And again, we believe that was consistent with your regulatory requirements.
Are there any questions? Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Ask me more times.
Is there anyone from the public wishing to testify this evening? Again, is there anyone from the public wishing to testify on this item this evening? And for a third time, is there anyone here from the public wishing to testify on this item this evening?
I make a motion, we close the public portion.
Second.
Having been moved and seconded, discussion on closing the public portion of this item. Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? The public portion is closed. And Madam Co-Chair, I move that we take, some of us have been here since 6 o'clock.
Yes.
I move that we take a 5-minute recess.
Yes.
And then we'll come back for deliberation.
Thank you. I believe you don't need to move that. You can just declare that.
You're right. We don't move recesses. We're going to take a 5-minute recess. No.
Gee.
Be careful, please.
Morrison.
I'm gonna need you, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Alder Rodriguez.
Alder Evelyn Rodriguez, can I see you a second, please?
Really shouldn't talk about it. So I was here before the deliberation.
They're during the weekend because they work there. Some, a lot of traffic around. Now you have to know I'm going. I'll come to your request. Thank you. I appreciate your time. You're welcome.
Jamie, you still with us?
Okay.
Your head is moving.
Oh, yeah.
It's getting closer. Gravity's winning.
Gravity's winning.
Yes.
Is a very high price. I'm in $5 meter, so it's something approximately $5. It's a lot cheaper than, if I can get that data by where exactly, because I don't know where the $5 meters are. I don't, right? That was a figure because it's similar to the sex condition. We will not be able to, enforcement. So if you can share that data, that would be useful. And utilization, so we just every 2 hours. We normally do our utilization from 9 to 5 or very like so that you think so it takes more time, but it's all about when you do a details, you can license plate. And it's not this license plate and not address it. We're not going to be doing additional profile. So if you get sense, so highly that, hey, on Saturday is coming to
The plan that we're working on is we need to have.
I just, but at least it's going to show the case of we have this one has additional, so that then I can maybe do something.
No, 23rd. Well, there's a no, it's just questions. Yeah, well, they don't.
I'm trying, but I can't keep up with you guys. I'm gonna have to do small blurbs of the gist of what.
Right?
Pretty much.
I'm telling you.
You guys be up there. Please. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Because I've seen the park. I used to live over there and back there, so I hope that anyone there. But
Oh, are you?
I don't really look that old and tired, do I? Yes, I do.
No, you don't. You're right.
Brown. No, that's pretty much just different times of the day. Like I drink coffee on an empty stomach in the morning, so I'm like.
No.
Round three.
Let me see the order. Let me see the order.
Horrible headache. Now I'm getting tired of it.
Oh yeah, one of those hormonal heat.
It is. Well, I feel like, remember the ear came off for a few minutes.
Yeah, no,
And
it
I got
gets
excited.
stuffy. It gets stuffy. Thank you for the cough drop. You are very thoughtful.
Maybe red wine.
You know what it is? You gotta let it air out.
I got sinuses.
No, what you do, but you gotta let it air out. Let the bubble out.
You know, I need some. I need some.
Some fresh Gouda. Some fresh Gouda.
I like my friends.
So you get some fresh Gouda cheese, right? But you get the, you
Get
know,
the soul food around. Don't say the name. So you know my daughter. Excuse me. My chain going on. My baby's a chef.
you get like a medium. What are you doing to me right now? Medium. But you got to have the Gouda. With the asparagus
They
on
do
the
a,
side.
you know they do it with a,
There we go. I know how to do
They
it.
do it with the blue.
I know how to move.
There's a blue cheese one too. I forgot what they call that. It's amazing. No, it's not.
This is called.
Yeah.
Don't try the food, because I haven't eaten it. Oh, yeah? You cooking for us?
I hear that too.
You take that from him.
Thank you. We'll call this meeting back to order. We have closed the public portion of the meeting. And so is there a motion as we are now in deliberation? On item 1, order of the Board of Alders approving an amendment to the Yale University Central Science campus overall parking plan.
I move the item.
Second.
Having been moved and seconded, discussion on the item. So this item first needs to be amended by substitution first. Alder Marchand.
Mr. Chair, I move to amend by substitution.
Second.
Have been moved and seconded, discussion.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
It's my understanding that additional material was submitted to this committee for consideration. That's beyond what we received in the original submission, and to make sure that it's properly included in the submission and before us as a part of the voting item, my substitute amendment would incorporate that additional material. Thank you, and I encourage colleagues to vote yes on the motion to amend by substitution.
Any further discussion on this amendment? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, we're back to the item as amended. Further discussion, Alder Marchand.
Mr. Chair, I move an additional amendment.
Second.
Moved and seconded, discussion. Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader, Mr. Chair, and Madam Chair. I listened with great interest this evening to the presentation from the university officials and the applicants team. I think in general, they gave really good information. Of course, questions came up and concerns that came up that I think are valid for us to continue to look at beyond the consideration of this item this evening. And so I'm proposing to amend this resolution to give further instructions to the university in terms of its next annual update of this central science overall parking plan. Colleagues might recall that every year, usually in December, we receive from the university an updated central science overall parking plan, which is in compliance with the ordinance. We also receive from the med school and the other entities the annual update on the medical area overall parking plan. And it includes information much like what we see tonight. But I think what we ought to do is make sure that the next annual update that we should get in about 6 months' time, or 7 months' time, should include particular information that is relevant to some of the lines of questions that we had this evening. And so that's the intention of my amendment. And now I will attempt to read it to you so that you'll know what I'm actually proposing. But that's the intention. So if my colleagues look at the order, which is entitled Order of the Board of Alders Approving an Amendment to the Yale University Central Science Campus Overall Parking Plan. The second whereas clause ends with a period. I'm going to change that to a semicolon. And after the semicolon, there'll be the word and. And then after and, there'll be a new whereas clause that will read thus. Whereas, comma, during the meeting of the Joint Community Development Legislation Committee, various concerns were raised by residents and alders, period. That's one change of my amendment. Just adding one more whereas clause. Skip to the end. The end, we have the now therefore be it resolved. We're approving it, period, at the end of that paragraph. What I'm adding is an additional effective clause, right? A paragraph that will be tacked on at the end of this text. And it will say, be it further resolved that the New Haven Board of Alders directs Yale University to include in its next annual update on the central science. Resolved is what is the verb in the prior effective clause. So I'm keeping with the same verb. Or is this, oh, look, there's a red line version. Ordered. Thank you, sir. That's why we did the substitute amendment. Okay, I'm looking at a prior version. Thank you. That's all. So it'll say, be it further ordered that the New Haven Board of Alders directs Yale University to include in its next annual update on the Central Science Overall Parking Plan, likely in December 2024, a report from a parking engineering firm on including an analysis of on-street parking of a broader area bordering Science Hill, including, for example, Mansfield Street and Winchester Avenue. Semicolon. A parking fee market analysis for downtown and nearby areas of New Haven. Semicolon. A more detailed a more detailed engagement or participation analysis in the university's parking demand management programs. Period. So that is my amendment. The goal here is to say, we're, approving this amendment, but next time you give us the annual update, we want more information on some of these areas of concern and questioning that we had in our committee meeting tonight. And they can certainly do it because they're going to give us an annual update in just a few months' time. And I hope this is helpful, and I encourage colleagues to vote yes on this motion to amend. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Is there any discussion on this amendment? Alder Redente.
I would just like to add, if we could, onto Winchester and Mansfield to also include Division Street and Canal Street.
So we'll need to vote on this first.
Okay, then re-amend.
And then, or unless Alder Marchand is willing to.
I'll accept those as friendly amendments.
Okay. Would you restate that so we make sure that?
Sure. Just to amend Alder Marchand's motion, I would like to propose adding Division Street and Canal Street to that canvas.
Okay, so and Alder Marchand is accepting that as a friendly amendment. Okay.
I think so.
Is there any other discussion on this amendment? Alder Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am in support of this amendment. It is very well thought out, and I think it is very important to include that further analysis of any of the surrounding areas that are going to be affected by these projects, because we do live in areas that have multi-dwelling units, and we are greatly impacted by these parking issues. And I think it's a great idea to add further study into it because it affects so many different locations in that surrounding area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Edwards. Any further discussion on the amendment? Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to share appreciation in reference to the discussion that we had with Yale University and their acknowledgement of building a better partnership relationship in terms of the community development of this project.
Discussion is on the amendment.
This is on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, that wasn't on the amendment, but is there any further discussion on Alder Marchand's amendment? Alder Saban.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to ask the proponent of the amendment if he would accept as a friendly amendment in addition to the areas that would be analyzed in the further parking analysis, the area between State Street and Orange Street in East Rock. Or if you need specific streets.
I think probably what we ought to do is between now and the second reading, look at a map and be clear on exactly what streets we would direct them to do. I think for the moment, we're expressing an intention to go westward and upward. But if we have another bite at this apple at the second reading, and probably we would benefit from looking at a map and being as clear as possible. So I don't think we'll add it just yet, but doesn't mean we couldn't at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion on Alder Marchand's amendment and the friendly amendment by Alder Redente? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, the amendment passes. We're back to the order as amended. Is there further discussion? Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to speak in favor of the item as amended. I think, look, there is some risk that the reduction in the overall parking plan could lead to more spillover into the neighborhood. I think that risk is relatively small at this point, given the small number of the reduction, certainly in percentage terms, if you just look at the overall inventory for this particular overall parking plan. So, and I also don't think, like, if we said no, then the university would have to find more parking somewhere else in the central science area, which could mean losing a side yard or some green space that might be an unintended consequence that we wouldn't endorse either. So I think, I have enough confidence that there's a big enough surplus currently that we won't see a huge deterioration of affairs. However, I think by requiring the university to do more study, we can have further assurance in short order. And so that gives me confidence to vote yes to approve this amendment to the overall parking plan, and encourage colleagues to vote yes as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Marchand. Is there further discussion on this order as amended? Alder Sabin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also in support of the amendment. I think given the existing surplus and the overall number of spaces that are available and the number of spaces that are being taken away, I think it seems like there probably won't be an increase in parking issues. But that doesn't mean that there aren't parking issues that we have right now. And so I think, while I'm in support of this, I do think that that the city and the university need to do a better job of working together to manage parking issues. I think in part that comes down to the city enforcement needing to have more resources and be better, because that's, we need to be able to make sure that if people are making a calculus about whether they should park at a Yale lot or on the city street, that's the calculus is appropriate based on the enforcement happening. And so that's one point. I also think, though, that the university needs to make sure that it is doing more to make it easier for people to get around the city, get around campus without using a car, that people are, we haven't even really talked about housing tonight, but obviously there are more employees who are going to be working at the university in these buildings, and if there's not housing that's near the campus, then that obviously drives up the cost for our residents. It also means that people are going to be driving in from somewhere else, and so these are all things that I think that are not necessarily specifically related to whether we can or should approve the amendment to the overall parking plan that's before us tonight, but I think they're really important and things that we need to do more work on going forward to make sure that as the university grows and the city is growing generally, our residents are protected from rising costs, whether that's housing or parking, and not just costs in terms of dollars, but not being able to find a parking spot, that's a cost as well. So I'm in favor of the amendment, but I wanted to add those thoughts as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Sabin. And this would be the time to discuss the amendment. And so is there any more discussion on the amendment?
If I may.
Certainly, Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand corrected. And again, I'd like to reiterate what I mentioned about Yale University's awareness and willingness to work on some sort of partnership to help us to work together in community development and in community addressing the parking issues that we both faced as members of this community. We are 144,000 counting as of March 2024, and we're going to continue to increase in New Haven. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder Rodriguez. Any further discussion on this amendment? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? The amendment passes. Is there another motion?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Having been moved and seconded, is there a discussion of the motion to adjourn? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstaining? Or any opposed, any abstaining? We are adjourned. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. In real life, you do. I'm not saying that.
Oh, it's no big deal. Let's just look at a map. That would be good.
I got you.
I understand obviously there's